Up next, we're going to talk about the various different types of nonverbal communication. And there are a lot of different types of nonverbal communication that often work in concert with one another and that we are using all of the time, sometimes without even realizing it. So the first category of nonverbal communication that we are going to talk about is kinesics. The word kinesics comes from the root word kinesis, which means movement. If any of you are kinesiology majors, that's what this is all about, right? So kinesics refers to the study of hand, arm, body, and face movements. And we are specifically going to look at gestures, head movements, and postures. So let's talk first about gestures. Gestures are those hand and arm movements that we use on a regular basis whenever we are talking. And there are generally three different types of gestures that we use. We have adapters, emblems, and illustrators. Adapters are touching behaviors and movements that indicate the internal state of the speaker, and it's typically related to some kind of anxiety or uneasiness, or nervousness. And so these are typically behaviors that are targeted towards the self, but they can also be targeted towards objects or towards others. And this can be anything from clicking a pen rapidly or the bouncing of a leg up and down. It can also be scratching at an arm or at your face, or anywhere else really. It can be twirling your hair. It can be fidgeting with your fingers. It can even be coughing or clearing your throat, right? And smartphones have become really common object adapters. And we just do these gestures without even thinking about it whenever we are feeling uneasy or nervous or anxious. And usually, like I said, they're turned inward towards the self, but they can also be turned towards objects like pens or phones, or even towards others sometimes. Emblems are gestures that have specific and agreed upon meanings. So these are actually trying to communicate a message, usually intentionally, but whereas adapters are just unintentionally communicating nerves, right? But emblems have specific agreed upon meanings. And these are different from signs that are used by people who are hearing impaired or others who use American Sign Language, because these emblems are not a formal part of any sign or language system, but they do have a meaning that we all kind of agree upon. So, for example, if you were to see someone standing on the side of the road with their arm out and their thumb up, you know that they're a hitchhiker, right? Or if someone were to put their index finger and thumb together in a circle and have their other three fingers standing up, you know that that means that they are A-okay. Or if they give you their thumb up in the air or their thumb down, right? That means that you're either doing a good job or a bad job, right? And all of these gestures have an agreed upon meaning within a culture. And that's a really important part of it, right? Because if I give a thumbs up in America, that usually means that you're doing a good job or you're good to go or something along those lines. It's a positive gesture. But if I were to give a thumbs up in Australia or in Greece, I might be saying up yours, right? And if you're in America, you know what the middle finger means, right? If someone is just gesturing at you with their middle finger, you know what that means. But that gesture is different in other countries. So, for example, if you are in England, the equivalent of the middle finger is actually a backwards peace sign. So it's holding up the first two fingers with the back of the hand turned outwards. And that's the equivalent of the middle finger in England. And so my point is that these gestures, these emblems, can be different among different cultures, but within that culture, they have that agreed upon meaning. So you do have to be careful with these emblems. And then the final gesture that we have are illustrators. Illustrators, appropriately, illustrate the verbal message that they accompany. So these are those gestures that reinforce the message, and generally speaking, they do things like indicate the size or shape of an object. And these are largely involuntary, but we tend to do them quite automatically. Another type of kinesic that we use are head movements. And these head movements are generally used to acknowledge others or to communicate interest or attentiveness at them. So when you see someone that you recognize in the hallway, but you're just kind of passing one another, you might give them a quick little upward head nod, right? It's a universal sign of acknowledgement in cultures where a formal bow is no longer used, right? So we don't really bow to each other, especially here in the United States, but we might give someone a quick little, like, point our chin up towards the sky very quickly in order to acknowledge them, right? But we also use our head to communicate that yes, nodding our head up and down, that we are understanding something, or no, shaking our head side to side to indicate that we do not understand or that we do not agree. And we can also move our head to indicate interest in someone. So if we have our head facing slightly up, that might indicate an engaged or otherwise neutral attitude. Whereas if we have our head down, that might signal a more negative or aggressive attitude. And then finally, within kinesics, we have posture. So posture happens when we are standing, sitting, squatting, and lying down. And within each of these postures, there are many different variations, right? So when we're standing, we might be standing up tall with our shoulders back, like you see on the right here, or we might be standing with our shoulders in, chest down, head down, like we see on the left. And most of our communication happens when we are either standing or sitting. And we can communicate different things in these different postures, right? So if we are standing and we put our hands on our hips and kind of adopt a Wonder Woman type pose, that communicates power to others. And it can also help you to feel more powerful additionally, right? And if you are communicating with someone, if you're kind of sitting and you're leaning back when you're talking to them, that could show informality or indifference to what is being said. Whereas if you are leaning forward towards the person, that shows interest and attentiveness. Even something like straddling a chair can be seen as a sign of dominance. And I tell my public speaking students all the time about the importance of their posture, right? Because if they come up for their speeches with their shoulders back, their chest out, their head held up high, like you see in the image here on the right, that communicates to their audience that they are confident, that they know what they're doing, that they are here to tell you about this cool thing that they know about. Whereas if they come up with their shoulders down and in and their chest down and their head down, that can often communicate nervousness and like you're unsure or uncertain and that you don't want to be there. So our posture communicates not only to others, but it also communicates to ourselves. And that's a really interesting part of posture and of kinesics. So as you can see, kinesics are a pretty big part of how we communicate non-verbally.